Well, for more on the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni's announcement, we're now joined by Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko. She's from the University of Stellenbosch Business School. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Moleko. Just give us your assessment of the package that's been unveiled by National Treasury today.
I think very good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. Firstly, there is no new money that is coming into the budget. So I think that in our discussion, we must understand that we are using the existing fiscus. An amount of 36 billion has been announced for immediate disbursement to those that were affected by the unrest, but also there is an amount of about R1 billion that is being allocated to SAPS, the South African Police Service, but also to South African National Defence Force to the tune of, I think, 700 million rand. So I think that additional 250 million to SAPS and 700 million to SANDF is really to help support bringing stability to those affected areas. I think the second point in today's announcement of that 36.2 billion additional support is that there is some reprioritization within the budget that will happen. There has been also additional revenue that has been collected in Q1 that is on the back of supporting this drive to reprioritize. I think the key measures that the state has put in place is a 2.3 billion allocation to the small business support. So businesses that are non-insured can now apply. It is, however, not clear what the conditions and the criteria besides tax compliance are. And I think CFA, together with the Department of Small Business Development and DTIC, need to quickly get information to businesses on who's qualifying, what they can apply for, and what the areas that are designated for this application. I think second to that is the recovery of those that are getting support is the loss of support on infrastructure. It is unclear on the amount. I think the amount that was referred to is that there will be additional support further offered to the tune of about 15 billion that now has to be reprioritized. I think the other additional point that is quite significant is the 27 billion for the social relief distress grant, which will be the 350 that is allocated to vulnerable households and those that are able to apply from the Department of Social Development for that social relief of 350. And that the details of when that starts wasn't clarified, but we now know that this additional relief will be provided until end of March or March 2022. So these are the new additional items.
Yes, understood there, Dr. Moleko. But then in terms of that assistance ending at the end of March 2022, what happens thereafter? Because obviously there's still going to be a lot of political pressure for some sort of support to be given those who need.
Yeah, so I think that's a very important question. What happens thereafter? I think we've got to look at three key questions. Is that the economic recovery plan, has it been able to sufficiently boost economic growth, yield productivity, and deal with the precarious situation of our labor market that is unable to absorb our low-skilled unemployed entrants? These are the questions that will detail whether or not the 11.4 million, which contribute to the more than 13 million South Africans that are living in poverty. So the temporary relief of 350 rand is not a long-term solution. It should be a temporary relief. But I think the more emphasis should be placed on future targets and growth targets on how we're going to make sure that the government is able to deal with the precarious labor market that is unable to absorb the unemployed. We've got to look at productivity in manufacturing and industry, agriculture, labor absorptive sectors that can absorb our people so they can work. Not only work, generate revenue for those businesses, all those enterprises in those sectors, but also ensure that there's economic activity where there was none. Our people that are 11.4 million that are not in the labor market, not actively working, need to be absorbed. And that is where the future lies. And so when you look and ask me what happens after March, what happens is whether or not our economic strategy is able to decisively deal with those issues on the inclusivity and the productivity enhancement and the ability to absorb the unemployed. And that is what's going to change our growth and productivity productivity trajectory. So I think the focus should be on those issues in addition to the small business support and the support that will be targeted right now at those affected by the 2 weeks of loss of economic activity in KZN mainly and Gauteng.
Yeah, like you say, you do need a gambit of measures to be able to deal with all the various challenges. But what do you think about the 5 billion rand that's going to be going towards the employment tax incentive? Obviously, that's the promotion of the productive side of the economy. How much of an impact do you think that will make?
So we've seen with the last year's temporary employment relief scheme that the economic recovery plan would tell you whether or not that has been sufficient to boost output and to boost growth for those productive sectors. The net effect was we lost 1.4 million. We did provide 1.4 million jobs overall for 2020 period. So we weren't able to sufficiently recover, but also we saw the productive outcomes for the annual period during the time when we employed the temporary employment relief scheme actually contracting by 7.2 negative. So for the first time, South Africa experienced an annual contraction to that extent. And we know that the last time was around World War II. So whether or not these mechanisms are adequate, I think the numbers are showing us that quite clearly. To simply continue along the same employment measures and the relief scheme, they are not adequate. So we've got to pump in more beyond the temporary relief schemes and the measures if we want to see employment up and we want to see new businesses that employ the low-skilled majority of South Africans that are not employed in the labor market. So you've got to try and see, are the mitigating actions you're putting in place results? We've seen in the first quarter as well a trickle, I think, an increase on the upside of about 1.1% increase in GDP in the quarter. But we know that with quarter two results that are going to come shortly, these will contract slightly because economic activity in the main economic centers or nodes has declined, that being Gauteng and KZN, because of the social unrest that emanated from those areas. So we're going to see the net effect probably us being where we were at the beginning of the year. And the question really is, what are the decisive measures forward-looking that are going to give us different results? And I don't think we have those yet. And we mustn't be forced to tell a good story when the story is not good.
Spot on. Thank you very much, Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko. She's from the University of Stellenbosch Business School.